My daughter said her stepdad was a better father than me, so I spent her $80K college fund. But when Brandon betrayed her and she came back crying, reality broke her completely. I'm 42 years old, work in financial consulting, and it's been almost 2 years since my relationship with my daughter Chloe basically disintegrated. And honestly, I still don't know if I did the right thing or if I'm the worst father in the world, but I need to get this out because I've been turning it over in my head for months, and maybe writing it down will help me process it. I guess I should start at the beginning, when everything went to hell, which was like 3 years ago when I discovered that Michelle, my wife at the time, had been having what she called an emotional connection with Brandon, some guy from her work for months. It wasn't technically a physical affair, or that's what she swore to me when I confronted her. But you know, when your wife tells you she fell in love with another guy while she's still married to you, the technical details don't really matter much, you know what I mean? We'd been together 16 years, married 14 of those 16, and I thought, we had a decent life. Like, not perfect, but solid. I mean, we argued like any couple, but nothing serious. And Chloe was our only daughter, and literally my entire world. When she was like 8 or 9, we used to have this Sunday ritual where we'd go get pancakes, just her and me. And she'd tell me everything about her school friends and her teachers and her dreams of being a veterinarian or an astronaut or whatever it was that month, and I'd listen and feel like the luckiest father on the planet. But when Michelle dropped the Brandon thing on me, that whole world crumbled in literally a 20-minute conversation in our living room while Chloe slept upstairs. She was 11 at the time, I think. The divorce took like a year and a half to finalize because Michelle wanted to fight over everything. The house, custody, even the damn dog she didn't even like, but suddenly was super important to her. And during all that time, I tried to keep things as normal as possible for Chloe. We explained together that we were separating, that it wasn't her fault, all the standard shit that child psychologists say you have to say, and at first she seemed okay, like sad obviously, but managing it. We agreed on shared custody, 1 week with me and 1 week with Michelle. And for the first few months after I moved to a smaller apartment, everything seemed to work. Or at least that's what I thought. But then Michelle officially moved in with Brandon like 6 months after the divorce, and that's when things started to change with Chloe. At first it was small details, like she'd arrive at my custody week, and she was quieter than normal. Or she'd casually mention things like, "Brandon says that's not how you do it," when I was cooking, or, "At Mom's house we have better internet," or any comment that technically wasn't hurtful but felt like little stabs. I tried not to take it personally because, well, she's a teenager, and her life had just changed completely. But honestly, every comment stayed there, accumulating. And then Brandon started playing the super stepdad role, you know? He'd take Chloe to concerts, bought her a new iPhone. He'd told her she had to wait until her birthday, let her stay up late on weekends. Basically everything a parent does when trying to buy a kid's affection, but technically not breaking any rules. Michelle told me not to be paranoid, that Brandon just wanted to have a good relationship with Chloe, but I could see perfectly what was happening. My daughter was constantly comparing me to him, and I was always losing, because I was the one setting rules and worrying about her grades and bedtime, while he was the fun friend who didn't have to do the hard work of being a parent. It went on like that for like 8 months, with the distance growing more and more between Chloe and me, and it got to a point where our weeks together felt like being with a stranger who tolerated my presence more than enjoyed it. I tried talking to her several times, like, "Is everything okay? Is there something you want to tell me?" But she always responded with monosyllables or locked herself in her room with headphones. And honestly, I didn't know what else to do, because I'd never prepared myself for my own daughter to reject me that way, especially when I hadn't done anything wrong other than divorce her mother after she basically emotionally cheated on me. The moment that really changed everything was one night, like 2 years ago. Chloe had just turned 14 and we were eating pizza at my apartment. He tried to cook pasta but burned it. Another point against me, I guess. And out of nowhere she tells me, like with no preparation at all, "Brandon is the father I deserve. He really understands me and cares about me, not like you who just pretends." I sat there with a piece of pizza halfway to my mouth, trying to process what I'd just heard, and all I could say was, "What?" like an idiot. And she continued, "Told me that Brandon really listened to to her, that with him she could be herself, that he supported her in everything, while I only criticized her, and ended by saying she wished he was her biological father instead of me. I don't know if anyone's ever said something to you that literally takes the air from your lungs, but that was exactly what I felt. My hands started shaking and I had to put the plate on the table because I thought I was going to drop it, and all I could think was, this is my daughter, the little girl I carried on my shoulders at the park, who I read stories to every night for years, and she's telling me she'd rather some other guy was her father. I tried to stay calm, told her that hurt me a lot and that we needed to understand together why she felt that way, but she just got up from the table, said whatever, and went to her room, slamming the door. That night I didn't sleep at all. Stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling and thinking about every interaction I'd had with her in recent months, trying to, I find where I'd failed so spectacularly. The next morning when I took her back to Michelle's house, Chloe didn't even say goodbye to me, just grabbed her backpack and left without looking back. I sat there in the car for like 10 minutes before I could even start the engine. That week was one of the worst of my life, honestly, because I kept replaying her words in my head, over and over. The father I deserve. And each time it hurt the same or worse than the first time. I called my sister, Patricia, she's 45 and lives like 2 hours from here, and told her everything. And she told me Chloe was just being a teenager and it would eventually pass, but I wasn't so sure. It was during that week that I made a decision that was probably selfish, but at the time seemed necessary to protect myself. Since Chloe was born, I'd had a life insurance policy where she was the only beneficiary. Like if something happened to me, she'd receive like $500,000, and I'd also been religiously saving in a fund for her college since she was 2, had already accumulated like $80,000. After what she told me, I decided to change the beneficiary of the life insurance to Patricia, because I thought, if Chloe really prefers Brandon as a father, then let him be responsible for her financial future. I don't have to keep being the plan B, who pays, but doesn't matter. I know how it sounds. I know it perfectly. But at that moment, I felt so betrayed and hurt that I needed to do something that made me feel like I had at least a little control over my life. And I didn't stop there. To be completely honest, that college fund was technically in my name. Like legally, I could do whatever I wanted with that money. And I thought that if Chloe had basically discarded me as a father, then I had no obligation to finance her future, while she idolized a guy she'd known for less than 2 years. So I started using that money for myself, not all at once, but little by little, bought myself a new car, well used but new to me, a 2020 Toyota Camry, changed some furniture in the apartment, and then Patricia convinced me we should take a trip together to Europe because I hadn't had a decent vacation in years. We spent like $20,000 on that trip, 2 weeks touring Italy and France, and honestly it was the best thing I'd done for myself in a long time. I felt free for the first time in years. When I got back from the trip, like 4 months had passed since the pizza conversation, and Chloe was still distant and cold during her weeks with me. Basically only talked to me when she needed something, or when she had no other choice. I hadn't told her anything about the financial changes because, frankly, I didn't think it was her business. It was my money and my insurance and my decisions. But turns out Michelle had been helping Chloe research universities and costs and all that. She was 14, but Michelle is one of those people who plans everything years in advance, and at dozen and two. Some point Michelle mentioned something to her about the college fund I'd been saving. Like, don't worry about costs because your dad has a good fund saved for you. Chloe apparently decided to verify this with me. I guess to know exactly how much there was and what universities she could consider, and one afternoon during her week with me, she asked me directly how much money was in her college fund. I stayed quiet for a few seconds, debating whether to lie to her or tell her the truth, and finally decided she was old enough to handle reality. I told her the fund no longer existed, that I'd used that money for other things, and she stared at me like I'd spoken to her in another language. She asked me what I meant that I'd used it, and I explained that I'd decided I wasn't going to keep saving for her college because she'd made it clear that Brandon was the father she preferred, so he could take care of her education. The expression on her face was something I'm probably never going to forget, like she went from confusion to shock to fury in literally 5 seconds. She yelled at me, how could I do something like that? That money was for her future, that I'd been saving since she was a baby, and now suddenly it didn't exist. And I told her, with a calm I definitely didn't feel inside, that I'd made that decision after she told me Brandon was a better father than me and she wished he was her biological dad. I told her that if she really felt that way, then she needed to understand the consequences, that being a father wasn't just taking her to concerts and buying her things, but also planning and sacrificing for her future, and that if I wasn't the father she wanted, then it didn't make sense for me to keep making those sacrifices. Chloe started crying, which I hadn't seen her do in months, and told me I was cruel and that I hated her. And before I could respond, she was already calling Michelle crying and telling her I'd stolen her college money. Michelle arrived at my apartment in like 15 minutes, definitely drove over the speed limit, and came in like a hurricane, yelling at me how dare I punish our daughter for something that was between Michelle and me, that the divorce hadn't been Chloe's fault, and that using her education as revenge was the lowest thing I could do. I tried to explain that it wasn't revenge but consequences of Chloe's words, but Michelle didn't want to hear anything. It just kept yelling that I was a terrible father, and she was going to make sure Chloe knew exactly what kind of person I was. I also mentioned, since we were at it, that I'd changed the beneficiary of my life insurance from Chloe to Patricia, and if I thought Michelle was furious before, that took her to another level completely. She told me I was completely cutting my own daughter out of my life over a comment she made when she was angry, that I was a pathetic man who couldn't handle being hurt by a teenager, and that Brandon was a better father figure than me, because at least he didn't condition his love with money. That last part hurt more than I want to admit, but I stood firm, told her to get out of my apartment, and that Chloe could stay with Michelle permanently if that's what they both wanted. The following weeks were basically a cold war every time Chloe came for my custody week, which was still mandatory by court order. She practically didn't talk to me beyond one-word answers, spent all her time in her room or with headphones on, and when I tried to start any kind of conversation, she either completely ignored me or responded with sarcasm. I didn't make much effort either, honestly, because I felt justified in my anger and my decision, and every time I saw her, all I could think about was the father I deserve, and feel that same stab in my chest. Patricia called me often to see how I was, and always told me I needed to be the adult and build bridges. But I was too hurt and too proud to take the first step. This continued for like two months until Patricia decided enough was enough and showed up at my apartment one Saturday when Chloe was with me. She hadn't warned me she was coming, just knocked on the door, and when I opened it, told me the three of us needed to talk. Chloe was in her room, and Patricia went straight there, knocked on the door, and asked her to come out. What happened next was basically Patricia taking us both to the living room and telling us we were both stubborn and proud and hurting each other out of pure pride, and that we needed to have a real and honest conversation or our relationship was going to be dead forever. Patricia talked with Chloe alone first. They were like half an hour in the room with the door closed, and I stayed in the living room trying not to listen through the door, but obviously trying anyway. I couldn't hear much, but I did hear Chloe cry at several points. Then Patricia came out and told me Chloe wanted to talk to me, but I had to promise her I was going to really listen and not just defend my position. And I agreed, even though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. When Chloe came out, her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she sat on the couch as far from me as possible, but at least she was in the same room, which was already something. Neither of us knew how to start. We just sat there in uncomfortable silence for what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 minutes. Until finally she said, with a very small voice I hadn't heard from her in years, that she hadn't meant what she said about Brandon. I mean, yes, she'd said it, but not really. That she was angry at me about the divorce and everything, and Brandon had been telling her things about how I didn't value her, and she believed him because she wanted to believe him. She told me she missed when we were close, when we'd go get pancakes and talk about everything, and that she didn't know how we'd gotten to this point where we were basically strangers. And I had so much to say, and so, too much anger still, but when I saw her there, small and vulnerable again like when she was a little girl, something in me broke a little. I told her that her words had devastated me, that I'd spent 14 years of my life being her dad and adoring her more than anything in the world, and that hearing her say she preferred another guy as a father was like having my heart ripped from my chest. I told her I understood she was angry about the divorce, but I hadn't asked for this to happen, that her mom was the one who decided to fall in love with someone else, and that it wasn't fair for me to carry all the weight of her pain when I was suffering too. Chloe started crying again and told me she was sorry, that she'd been horrible to me and she understood why I'd made the decisions I made, even though they hurt her. I asked her if she really understood or was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear, and she stayed quiet for a moment before admitting that no, she didn't really. I understand why I'd used her college money and changed the insurance. That felt like a disproportionate punishment for something she said when she was angry. And she was right. Like on some level I knew it had been disproportionate, but I wasn't ready to admit it yet because I was still too hurt. That conversation didn't fix everything, not even close, but it was the first real moment we'd had in months. Patricia stayed the weekend and helped us navigate some of the more difficult conversations, like establishing that we'd both said and done hurtful things, that the divorce had affected both of us, though, in different ways, and that we needed to find a way to rebuild something, even if it was a fraction of what we had before. Chloe went back to Michelle's that week with things a little less tense, but definitely not resolved, and I was left thinking that maybe, just maybe, we could eventually get to a better place. But then everything went to hell again, but this time it wasn't my fault, or Chloe's. Turns out Brandon, the perfect super stepdad, wasn't so perfect after all. Like 3 weeks after the conversation with Patricia, Michelle discovered Brandon was cheating on her with another woman from his work. Ironic, right? And when she confronted him, he got violent, not physically but verbally, said horrible things to her. And worst of all was that Chloe was there when it happened, heard the whole argument. And when she tried to defend her mom, Brandon turned on her too, yelled at her that she was a spoiled brat and worthless, that she was just a burden on his relationship with Michelle. Chloe called me that night at like 11 at night, crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying, and all I could catch was, "Can I come to your house? Please, Dad, I need to get out of here." I told her yes immediately, that of course she could come, and I drove to Michelle's house as fast as I could. When I got there, Chloe was sitting on the front steps with a backpack. Michelle was inside dealing with Brandon. He could hear the yelling from outside, and my daughter got in the car and completely broke down, sobbing so hard her whole body was shaking. I took her to my apartment and we sat on the couch, and she told me everything. How Brandon had been super nice the first few months, but then gradually started changing, being more controlling and critical, and how she'd been too proud to admit to me she'd been wrong about him. She told me that everything she'd said to me about being a bad father had basically been Brandon's manipulation, that he constantly told her I didn't really love her, that if I loved her, I would have fought harder for the marriage with Michelle, that I was just pretending to care. And she, being a confused teenager angry about the divorce, had believed him. She apologized for everything, for every hurtful word, for comparing me to Brandon, for telling him he was a better father, for everything. She told me she'd been the worst daughter in the world, and if I didn't want to forgive her, she'd completely understand. And honestly, sitting there, seeing my little girl completely destroyed, all my anger and resentment just felt stupid. Yes, she'd hurt me deeply, but she was 14 years old when she said those things. She was a kid trying to process a divorce and being manipulated by an adult man who should have known better. I was the adult. I should have been stronger, more understanding, less reactive. But I also wasn't ready to just say, all is forgiven, and go back to how we were before, because we couldn't go back to how we were before. That relationship didn't exist anymore. I told Chloe I loved her, that I'd always loved her even when I was angriest with her, but that I needed time to process all this, and she also needed to show me with actions, not just words, that she really wanted to rebuild our relationship. I told her it wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be fast, that there was a lot of damage on both sides that needed to heal. She asked me about the college fund and the life insurance, and I told her honestly I didn't know yet what I was going to do about that I needed to see her really commit to repairing things between us before making any financial decisions. I know that sounds cold, but honestly I was still protecting my own heart, still afraid of opening up completely again and getting hurt once more. That was like 8 months ago, and since then things have been better. I guess. Better but complicated. Michelle obviously broke up with Brandon, and Chloe now lives primarily with me because she doesn't want to be in that house where everything with Brandon happened. We've been going to family therapy, which is uncomfortable and intense, but probably necessary. Patricia comes to visit us every few weeks, and Chloe has developed a close relationship with her, which is good. There are still moments where I wonder if I made the right decisions, if I was too harsh, if I should have been the adult and swallowed my pride sooner. There are still moments where I look at Chloe and remember her exact words about Brandon being a better father and feel that stab, though each time it's less intense. And she also has her moments where I can see she's carrying guilt for everything that happened, for the things she said, for the time we lost. We haven't gotten back the pancake breakfasts. That version of us left forever when she was 11 years old. But we're building something new, something different, but that maybe can be just as valuable if we both keep trying. I restored part of the college fund, not all of it because honestly I can't recover everything I spent, but enough so she can go to a state university if she keeps her grades up. The life insurance still has Patricia as beneficiary, and Chloe knows it and says she understands, though I know it hurts her. Last week we were watching a movie together, some random thing on Netflix, and out of nowhere she told me, "Thank you for not completely giving up on me, Dad. I know I gave you enough reasons to." And I didn't know what to answer because part of me did give up, at least for a while. But I told her that dads don't give up on their kids, even when the kids hurt them like hell, and she leaned on my shoulder, and we stayed like that the rest of the movie without saying anything else. And that was enough. For now.